kick things off, I actually had a question for this group, which is how many of you have actually heard about the pay-as-you-go announcement? We made the announcement at Ignite, but I'm just curious to see how many people actually heard it. So feel free to put your thumbs up if you did actually hear it. That's great. Okay, a couple of folks heard it. Great. Okay, good. And a couple didn't. Perfect. So that's a great, I think, starting point for where we will begin. So I'll start by giving you an overview of what Pay-as-you-go is, and then we'll dive into a demo for how you actually set it up within the context of the Power Platform Admin Center and the Power Apps Maker experience. So what is Pay-as-you-go? Let me go forward. Pay-as-you-go is a new way to pay for Power Apps. We built this in response to one of the #1 feature requests that we've had from across our community, which is to make licensing for Power Apps more like licensing for Azure. So today, when you license for Power Apps, you need to figure out in advance how many units you want to buy. You need to go through a procurement process to buy those units on your volume licensing agreement, and then you need to work with your administrator to get those licenses allocated in some fashion, right, in your organization. So there's a lot of work you have to do up front before you can actually go and share your application and have people use it in your org. What we heard from many of you is that you want the ability simply to build your app, share it with a bunch of people, and then have Microsoft charge you based on the actual usage of that app, not based on any type of pre-commitments that you've made. And so that's exactly what we're delivering with this pay-as-you-go capability. Just to double click on that a bit further, let me contrast it with the current models that we have. So as you might know today, we have two primary plans for Power Apps. One is a per app plan where a single user can access a single app, and that is cost for $5 per user per month. Another variant of that is a per user plan where a single user can access an unlimited number of applications, and it's priced at $20 per user per month. Now, both of those are prepaid plans, meaning that you need to figure out in advance how many units you need to buy and then go through the procurement process to actually buy them and administer them and so forth. So to complement these plans, we are introducing the pay-as-you-go option. And the way pay-as-you-go will work is based on this notion of an active user of your applications. And so we will charge $10 per active user per application per month. What is an active user? Let me dive into that. An active user is a user who opens an app at least once in a given month. That user could come back and open the same app 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. We will only count their usage that first time. And so that defines their active usage is when they use the app at least once. And we count 1 unit of active usage at that point, and we then bill that to Azure at a rate of $10 per active user. Now, if that same user goes in and uses a different app in that same month, that will be another unit that we would charge and bill to Azure. If that same user came back the second month and used the app again, we would bill another unit as well. And so it really kind of builds off this notion of active user and websites, and we kind of translate that over to Power Apps, and that's what we base this on. Now, one important thing to note about this model is that any users that have per user licenses for Power Apps are never counted as active users. And so you could have a app which you decide to share with both licensed Power Apps users and non-licensed users. And those that have licenses already don't get counted as active usage, and they won't be billed to Azure. And so that's how the model works overall. We basically sum up active users every month, and we multiply through by the price point, and then we bill that over to your Azure subscription bill is how it works. So
hey, Shawn, I think Harold has a hand up.
Great, go for it, Harold.
Didn't have my hand up for the last time.
Oh, from last time.
I should take it off. I didn't realize that.
All right.
All right, no worries, no worries. Yeah, feel free to put your hands up, folks, if you have questions, and yeah, definitely call me on a camera. All right, so when do we see this being used? Most commonly, we know that many developers and IT professionals in a lot of organizations have access to Azure subscriptions already and are increasingly looking to build apps that combine Power Apps as well as a backend running on Azure. Today, you have to license those very separately. You have to license your Azure components via your Azure subscription, and then you have to license your Power Apps via your licensing agreement. Now we can bring that world together, and you can simply pay for your Power Apps usage and your Azure usage using the same mechanism, which is the Azure subscription. It's a really easy way to get started with premium apps. So if you want to dip your toes into Power Apps, but maybe can't make a commitment yet, this is a great way to begin and see what the level of demand is for Power Apps in your organization, and then decide potentially to go to a prepaid model down the road to get better pricing and price efficiencies. One of the other patterns that we see is that if you need to distribute an app to a very large user base, but you don't know what subset of that user base is going to use the app, this is a great way to kind of get started with that. Today, to distribute an app to a large user base, you would either have to license all those users on per user, or you would have to allocate enough app passes to that environment where that app is running to cover that user base. Today, you can simply start with pay-as-you-go and see what level of demand is, and again, decide if you want to license some of those users on per user over time. And then finally, this is a very common request we get from lots of large organizations where they want to split the cost for their Power Apps investment across different business groups within their organization. There's no easy way to do that today in the Power Platform, but there are many ways to do that in Azure. So now that we have billing through Azure, you can take advantage of Azure's capabilities to split costs across different departments in your organization and build different cost centers for Power Apps usage. And that's another great benefit of the model. I'm not going to go into too much detail about all the meters we have, but the one we just talked about was something called the Power Apps per app pay-as-you-go meter. That's based on the number of active users using your applications. We also have meters for Dataverse, which charges you based on Dataverse consumption. And we have, or we will soon have, a meter for Power Platform requests as well, which will charge you based on any overages for Power Platform requests. On that last one, I do want to call out that at Ignite, we also announced that we increased the Power Platform request limits significantly for all of our licensing. Our goal here really is that 99% of customers and scenarios will never go over the amount of licenses or requests that we included with our licenses. But we know for those that do need to go over, we do now have a mechanism, which is to purchase an overage via Power Platform requests, and we won't throttle any of your usage when you do that. So that is available for very high scale scenarios. All right, so let me flip into the how to set it up. There are 3 steps that I'll highlight, and then we'll dive into a demo. The first is that we are going to link an environment to an Azure subscription, either in the Power App Platform Admin Center or in Power Apps itself. The ability to set up pay-as-you-go is done at an environment level. And the benefit of that is that if you have some environments in which you want to leverage pay-as-you-go, but others where you don't, you can do that. Simply link the environments that you want to leverage pay-as-you-go in to Azure subscriptions, and they will be set up for pay-as-you-go. Once you've done that, you can simply build and share apps in that environment like you typically would. You can share those apps with any unlicensed or licensed users in the organization, and any usage by those unlicensed users will be billed to your Azure subscription. Then finally, your billing information will appear in the Azure portal, much like any other Azure service today. The portal provides lots of great visualizations of your costs. It also provides a great ability to manage your costs using something called Azure Cost Management. Cost Management lets you set budgets for certain Azure services and trigger alerts and administrative actions when you hit those budgets, so you can better get a handle on what your costs are and minimize any surprises on your Azure bill. So with that, let me actually dive into the demo and just kind of show you how this works live. All right, so this is the Power Platform Admin Center. This is the environments view where we've got a bunch of environments here in our test organization. What I'm going to do is set up pay-as-you-go for one of these environments. To do that, I'm going to create something called a billing policy. So I'll go to Policies, which is a new tab we have, click on Billing Policies, and I'm going to create a new billing policy. Now, a billing policy you can think of as the link between the Power Platform environment and an Azure subscription. So let's go ahead and create a new policy. Let's call it Dallas. Click Next. I'm now going to be asked to enter my Azure subscription details. Now, what we do here is we look at your AAD ID and we see which subscriptions you have access to in your organization. In order to set this up, you need to have the ability to create new resources in an Azure subscription and to register resource providers. Most commonly, this will mean that you'll need to either be a contributor or owner of an Azure subscription, but there are also many custom permissions that can be set by your organization. So the core permissions you need are the ability to write a resource and the ability to register a resource provider. Now, we'll go ahead and scan AAD and we'll see where you have the correct permissions, and we'll give you a list of subscriptions in which you have permissions to do that. So you'll select a subscription, you'll then select a resource group in that subscription. Resource groups, for those of you not familiar with Azure, are just collections of resources in Azure you can use to better organize your Azure infrastructure. So I'll specify a resource group, and then I'll specify a region. The region I specify will dictate the environments that I can add to this. So the environments can have to be in the same region as the resource I'm creating here. So I'll go ahead and create that. Good. Now I'll be asked to select which environments I want to add. So let me go ahead and do that. Let me pick one I know I haven't added yet. Okay, let's do this one here. I'll add it to the policy, and this now appears in the added to policies list. I can come back anytime, and if I decide I don't want to enable pay-as-you-go or I want to disable pay-as-you-go for any of these environments, I simply need to come back in here, edit the billing policy, and I can go ahead and remove that from the policy, and that will stop pay-as-you-go billing from that point forward. So I selected that. It gives me a warning that this environment I selected has actually already been added to a different billing policy. So it asks me if I want to move it to this billing policy, which I do. So I'll go ahead and click continue. And I'll review the added details. It looks good. I'll go ahead and create it. And so what's happening now behind the scenes is that in addition to creating the billing policy here that we just did, we go over to Azure and we create an Azure resource that links to that billing policy. And that resource will be where all of our billing for our Power Apps and Dataverse and so forth take place. So let me go ahead to the Azure portal and show you what that resource looks like. So this is the Azure portal where I'm logged in as the same user. I'll go to resource groups. I'll choose the resource group that we created the billing policy resource in, and I'll click show hidden types. Our resource is actually a hidden resource, and you see here is the resource that we created. So this resource behaves just like any other Azure resource. I can see what costs are billed to it in Azure Cost Management. I can also tag it, which is super handy. Many organizations use tags to track what cost centers should be billed for this resource, who the owner of the resource is, what solution it maybe accrues to. There's lots of different ways to organize your resources using tags, and our resource types support that. All right, so that's how it's set up. I will just highlight that there's a similar experience in the Maker experience itself. And so within Maker, what you can do if you want to set up pay-as-you-go is click on settings for a specific application. And in app settings, there's a setup pay-as-you-go option. And from here, I won't go through the whole flow, but it's exactly the same as Power Platform Admin Center, where you'll specify the name of the billing policy, you'll select your Azure subscription, and then click create, and we'll go ahead and link it up to the Azure subscription you specified. So that is how that works. And just to highlight visually how this is all happening, imagine you had an organization with lots of different departments. You have the option to not set up pay-as-you-go for some of those environments, and those environments will keep operating just like they do today. Nothing changes. In this example, the organization has decided to set up pay-as-you-go for the HR team's environments, and they've linked it to a Azure subscription, which is paid out of the HR team's budget. So here you can see how you can do cost allocation to different groups. For the finance team, they've linked it to the finance team's Azure subscription, and they can do cost allocation that way if they want. Just to show you what reporting looks like really quickly. So we have two primary ways that we provide reporting. One is in Azure itself. And so this is a screenshot of Azure Cost Management. And you see that our meters here for Dataverse will show up here, and you can view visuals of exactly what that looks like. In addition, as I mentioned, through Azure Cost Management, you can define what's called budgets for your meters. So a very common concern people have when they go to a pay-as-you-go model is, how do I manage my costs? And budgets are one way to do that. And so here I can create a budget called the Power Apps budget. I can specify that I want to spend a maximum of $50,000 in a given month on the per app active user meter. And then I can set alerts to happen and triggers that when I approach that budget to text me or to call me or email me. And then I can have administrative actions also scripted to take place as well if there's things that I want to do. Now, one thing budgets don't do is they don't cap your spend. When we talk to customers about their cloud spend, we find that they don't want us to actually cap it, because that would mean shutting down their cloud services, which generally customers don't want to do. What folks do want to understand, though, is when they are hitting certain thresholds and certain limits, so that they can take appropriate actions that make sense for their apps and their organizations. And that's what cost management lets you do. Let me pause there. I know that's a lot. Any questions? Okay, I'll keep going. I'll mention.
I think Geetha did have a question.
Yeah.
Geetha, go for it. Yeah.
Just going to ask. So if users have the per user licenses assigned, and then let's say the admin gives them the capability to give access to, or they have the access to the pay-as-you-go environment as well. How does that impact billing? Like, is that tracked separately?
Just to play back the scenario, so if you have per user licenses assigned to some users in your organization, an admin decides to enable pay-as-you-go for one of the environments in your org. What will happen in that case is that any usage of apps in that pay-as-you-go environment by those per user licensed users won't be counted as Azure billed usage. We won't bill that usage to Azure because we consider those users as already licensed for Power Apps.
Gotcha. So it'll separate that out because they're able to access unlimited apps, but even though it's in the same environment, they're not. It doesn't get into the pay-as-you-go billing because they're already
That's
charged.
Right. Yep. They can simply go and use those apps like they would any other Power App. They won't see a trial prompt or anything like that. It'll just work, and they won't be billed to Azure. If an unlicensed user comes in though into a pay-as-you-go environment, they won't see a trial prompt either, but their usage will be billed to Azure because that's how the admin is configured.
And then Shawn, just from my understanding too, so it's scoped at the environment level. And then does that mean that that applies to every single app that's in that environment, or can you specify specific apps to use that and other apps in the same environment to not use that model?
Good question. By default, it's enabled for every app in the environment. However, we do also offer a setting through Maker.
That's where I got a little confused because you went pretty quick there. And so you can set it at an app level to not make use of that policy?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
That's correct. In Maker, if I were to have had this set up, I think I might have a screenshot of it, but if I did have pay-as-you-go set up for this environment, then you would see an option here, which would be like disable pay-as-you-go for this particular application in that environment. But by default, it's going to be enabled for all applications in that environment. And one thing I want to clarify on that particular point is when you toggle that off, if you were to disable pay-as-you-go for this app, it turns off the Power Apps per app meter for that app. But of course, any Dataverse charges are going to still be billed to Azure for that environment that are driven by this application, because there's no way for us to kind of disentangle Dataverse usage by one app versus another in an environment. So we do bill all Dataverse usage to Azure in that case, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I followed you there.
I have a screenshot of that setting here. Let me just go back up. Here it is. Okay, so to your last question, this is an example where pay-as-you-go has been set up for this environment. You go to the apps list, you click on settings for one of the apps, and you can actually disable pay-as-you-go billing for a specific app in that pay-as-you-go environment. So that is possible to do.
Okay.
Another thing I wanted to mention on reporting, I showed you the Azure report where we show billing amounts and so forth. We know that another common question from customers is likely going to be, so it's great, I know I was charged, $100 for my Power Apps usage. Which specific users in my organization and which specific applications in my environment actually drove that usage? And so to answer that question, we are also providing a downloadable report in the Power Platform Admin Center that looks like, let me pull it up here. Okay, it looks like this, and it's a lot. It's very granular, but it tells you, for exactly what environments, what meters, and so forth that we actually billed you for. So in this case, there's a lot of Dataverse example usage. This is just an example report, but you can go into great detail for the Power Apps meter of exactly what user incurred what charges against what application for the Power Apps meter that we have to do a lot of tracking. And this is a great way, for example, if you're just dipping your toe in with Power Apps and you want to see if there's any consistent usage by users. If you see a user coming back using an app, multiple apps, several times regularly in a month, that's a great candidate for someone that maybe should be licensed under a per user license for better cost efficiencies. So we do provide you that ability to figure that out.
So this type of data collection, then, are you able to see that type of granularity within the Azure administration portal, or no, you download the data and then you can go crazy with Power BI off of this data and create easy to use reports to kind of drill in through the data?
That's right. This granularity is not available in the Azure portal because we're using the Azure portal primarily for billing. So we actually aggregate costs at a environment level, then at a meter level. And so Dataverse is a separate meter from Power Apps. And that's the granularity that you can get to on the Azure side. But what you can see is what drove that Power Apps meter charge, for example, what specific users, what specific apps, which is why we provided this complimentary report in the Power Platform Admin Center, so you can figure out that level of detail.
Geetha, did you have another question?
Oh, sorry. I had the same similar question like Ben, and I was wondering if that Azure Cost Management, the billing meter that we can see, it shows the unique. I guess it's just the number of unique users per month, right? Is it? Did you say it's an aggregate, or is it broken down by app or portal?
Yeah. Well, in the downloadable Power Platform Admin Center report, you can see it broken down by user and by application and by environment as well. So it gets quite detailed in terms of exactly what your charges are. But in the Azure portal, what we do is we have to aggregate that at some altitude, and so we've aggregated it right now at the environment level and the meter level. And so if you look here in Dataverse, you can view all your Dataverse charges. It's actually technically a billing policy resource that we have here, but there's sort of ways via the Azure API to view that at an environment level as well. But it is not going to get you down to the individual user level here.
Got it. And you said we could set budgets, right? Like, and for the monthly, or limits, I should say, budget limits within the Azure Cost Management is set. So we should be able to like trigger alerts too, right? Like if they cross a certain budget. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the key features of cost management. I've just got a static screenshot here, but you can set alerts as well. So you kind of define the budget, the timeframes for it, the amounts, and so forth. And then you trigger, okay, well, what do you want to have happen when you approach 80% of the budget, or if you hit it? And the two primary things you can do are, number one is just notifications of some kind, right? Text message or email. The second thing, though, is that you can script actions to take place. And so if you decide you want to take some admin action, you can go ahead and write a script for that.
Thank you. That was helpful.
And I think Michelle has a question.
Yeah, I have. So this is super out of my depths. So this may be related, it may not be. But for that super detailed report, is there any plans to include that in the report that you were showing earlier in Azure, or is it maybe going to get kind of like sucked into Center of Excellence or anything along those lines?
It's a great question. We'd like to get feedback on that. We're in a public preview right now, and we'd love to see what people think about it and where they would like to see it show up. Getting it into Azure is probably quite a bit of work to get to that granularity. So I think the first stop would probably be, how would we evolve it in the Power Platform Admin Center in the right way? How would we make it available in the Center of Excellence, as you suggested, right, in the right way, if that's where people want to see it? But this is exactly something we'd love to have people kick the tires on and see. Let us know where you'd like to see it.
Awesome. Cool. Oh, I have another question since my hand's already up anyway. Sure. So for the set alerts, and you said you could script actions and different things like that. Script actions as in you can kind of like integrate it with a company's service desk or, ServiceNow or anything along those lines. Nodding, yes. Okay, cool. That's good.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool capability. You can imagine, a lot of people going from on-premises to the cloud on Azure had exactly the same challenges, because when you go from a model where you're paying a committed license up front, right? It's predictable, you've got a budget, to a model where your costs are effectively unlimited, right? If someone goes and spins up a crazy virtual machine that costs you a bunch of money, you're going to pay for it. And that's true of any cloud provider. But we provided a number of administrative controls in Azure that let an admin set restrictions on what types of resources a given individual user can create, right? So if you wanted to block them from spinning up, NVIDIA, like crazy, 1,000 core, VMs, stuff like that. You could do that because that's just not in your company's budget or strategy. And so that's on the front end. You can control what resources are created. And then secondly, on the back end, you can have things like Azure Cost Management to let you know when you're hitting certain spend thresholds and stuff like that.
Okay, cool. And I'm guessing I could rattle off questions all night. But I guess so when the alert is sent off and let's say they're at like 90% of their budget, what are their options? Do they just contact would the company like admin just contact their Microsoft rep to get it sorted and kind of figure out what the best course of action there is? I'm thinking if there's I've seen some companies have apps that start out small and then become enterprise wide. And then I guess, yeah, I'm thinking about how IT would prep for something along those lines. Obviously, ideally, they would have center of excellence, but not always the case. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've seen a couple of different patterns, and there's a lot of really good documentation that's probably beyond my depth in terms of how people are managing their cloud costs and their approaches. But one is, first of all, like there's an accountability model that every organization has to decide how they want to work with, right? And that accountability model often mirrors their budgetary model. So if you give like a department with a dev team a budget and an Azure subscription, right, they're kind of accountable, right, for hitting that budget, and they need to manage their own spend in that way. That's a very common practice that we've seen to basically delegate that responsibility, that administrative responsibility around cost specifically. Beyond that, you can always script, like we said, alerts. You can always script actions ranging from lukewarm to kind of extreme. It's like we will shut down your resources if you don't do this, and if you choose, you can disable billing for Azure in this case, and that environment will start behaving like a regular environment. So any unlicensed users would start seeing trial prompts again. Any Dataverse usage, instead of being billed to Azure, would actually come out of your tenant-wide Dataverse pool of resources. So there's a fallback in that case, and a number of different options for admins based on what makes sense for them.
Very cool. Okay, thank you for answering my questions.
Of course.
So then I do have a specific scenario, Shawn, to see if you could shed some light on, because this is one that we've encountered in the past with some rather large clients. And so I just want to make sure that the usage, that triggers this type of licensing is in play or is not in play. And that is the scenario where you have a Power BI report and you use the Power Apps custom visual for people to write back to the data source. So they were having a large enterprise data source that would trigger the custom pricing, so outside of Office 365 pricing. And not everybody would be writing back to the data source, but this would be their finance group looking at data, and then they would want to write back with a new entry or something of that nature, correction for that month, and then hit the submit button, and then that writes it back to that data source. So triggering the licensing model here for the user that's using Power Apps, does that trigger only occur if they write back in that scenario? Or since there's a Power Apps custom visual that's in that Power BI report, that's what would trigger the usage?
That's a great question. I actually think, Cameron, this might have come up really recently, like in the last couple of days. I'd have to go and double check the answer on that about when exactly the trigger happens. Under the covers, it's when the application loads is kind of the signal we look for. What I don't know though is in your scenario is what in Power Apps, when does the application consider loaded, right? In the case of the Power BI kind of scenario. That's what I'm unsure of, and I think we're gonna have to double check that with the
and just from the scale of it, that one was like 20,000 users. So the figures get pretty high pretty quick, and custom development became a better option for them rather than a really easy solution using the custom visual and in combination with Power BI. So that's why I was asking.
Got it. And can I ask, in that scenario, was the expectation that only a subset of that 20,000 users was going to need the basically the Power Apps functionality there? Is that the
yes for the write back?
Got it. Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean,
and they have Power BI premium licensing. So, you know, all those users are licensed on the Power BI side of things. So it's just a subset of them. Let's say maybe like 5,000 of the 20,000 users would need the ability to write back.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Let me follow up on that and get an answer for that one. That's a good one.
Okay. Because I'm sure there's just some scenarios that, you know, would still require some fine tuning in the future. But the scenarios that you gave, you know, the 5 that you highlighted for the birth of this licensing model were all very great scenarios. I mean, especially the one getting started with premium Power Apps, you know, and seeing how it goes and then growing the usage after that. I mean, this really makes these scenarios way easier for companies to get going. So it's a big thank you to the team for coming up with the new pricing model.
So thank you to everyone here for all the feedback to we should do it. So really appreciate it.
And then the deck that you have here tonight, would you be able to, could we post that in our user group for people to just have for reference when they're having internal conversations in their organization, or a subset of the deck that makes it easier for people? Yeah,
let me clean it up and send you guys a subset of that. Many of the same kind of visuals and so forth are also available in our documentation too.
Okay.
So I've got a resources slide I was going to share too, but for sure, let me just clean it up and send it over to you guys for posting. Perfect. We'd love to get the word out about it more. Yeah, we have 2 primary resources. One is the blog post from Ignite, and the second is what happened there. The second is our docs, which is aka.ms/Power Platform pagey.
Okay.
And you can find the URL there. Yep.
Yeah, this is terrific. Thank you so much for coming and sharing the information.
Okay, thanks for the time. It's available now in public preview, so we definitely encourage folks to kick the tires on it and give us the feedback. Thank you.
All right, Geetha. Oh, I clicked the wrong button. I meant the clap, not the hand. So I'm going to lower my hand.
Not the frown button.
But thank you, Shawn. This was very helpful. You know, we've been hearing about this brand new pricing model for a while now. So you know, the ability to have this deep dive and to understand like what, you know, an active user means, and then just how you know, it falls into the different the limits and the scenarios that make sense to go with the pay-as-you-go versus, you know, getting the per user or per app license. It's really good to understand, see those examples coming in, and then I think it would also help like to know, are there any customers that you've seen use this pay-as-you-go license, and what scenarios are they? You know, is there like a pattern that you're seeing? You know, if you can share that, that would be helpful too, because you know we all have either customers or clients, or we are working in organizations, and if we identify such scenarios, you know, might be a good flag for us to bring up this new pricing model.
Yeah, it patterns pretty well to the scenarios I shared on the slide, which you guys will get, you know, in the deck. But I'll give you an example. So T-Mobile, which is one of our public reference customers, they were an example of an existing, you know, big Power Apps customer, but they had a situation where they had an app which was related to financial reporting that they needed to share with a large volume of users. But they were pretty sure that was only going to be a small subset of those users that would actually use the app on a regular basis. They didn't have in their budget enough money to budget for the Power Apps per app licenses or per user licenses for everybody. And so they love the fact they can now start with pay as you go and just kind of get it going. Another scenario for them too is that they have lots of different departments that are interested in Power Apps, and all of those departments are having to go through this central team to work out the licensing issues and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And frankly, the central team has had it. They're just like, you know, we just don't want to be part of this. Mm-hmm. They've got Azure subscriptions, just go, and they can point them at that. So it really saves them the administrative overhead of managing the licenses on an ongoing basis. So those are 2 examples that we see with them.
That's awesome. I did have one more question. So for a maker to be able to, you know, like you walk through the demo where you can go pick an app and, you know, it gives you the option to. So there might be scenarios, I'm just looking at like IT gating, right? They may not want makers to have the capability to go in and just sign up app, but they want to go through that gating process of an admin or through a governance framework setup. So is there a way to disable that? for just makers, regular makers who just have maker rights in the environment, and they probably need to go through a request to just sign up the app for a pay-as-you-go.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you can control the Azure subscriptions themselves with a great degree of granularity, right? And restrict or lock down the subscription overall or specific parts of a subscription too. So that's a great degree of control that admins actually have. On the Power App side, you do need to be you need to at least be a Power Platform. You need to at least be an environment admin on the environment that you're trying to control. And so I know that many organizations, if they want to restrict Power Apps creation, they don't let everybody create environments, right? It's a very small subset. And so in our pay-as-you-go world, you have to be at least an environment admin to be able to set up pay-as-you-go. And so if you're not that, then you can't set it up. And that's a point of control that we have.
Gotcha.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's more of a wish list item because I'm sure it doesn't exist. But is there like how Microsoft has like the infographic cheat sheets for like Excel and Word? Is there one of those for this for clients that may be asking for the easy version of this information?
I have to see. Now I'm curious. I want to see the infographics for Excel and Word. I don't know if I've seen those. If you have those, I'd love to see them.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find them.
Okay.
That's a dangerous slope, Michelle, because with your design skills that you displayed with your PowerPoint presentation, it kind of means like maybe that's something that you mock up.
Do one.
It's gonna be stickers everywhere.
Yeah, I'd love to see those. We know that our licensing is complicated, and that is an ongoing, I would say, effort we have to simplify as much as we can. We, for example, made a simplification to the Power Apps per app license earlier this year, where we changed it from being 2 apps in one portal to simply 1 app or portal. And that's going to, I think, simplify things a lot. But there's more we can do. And a lot of it comes down to the presentation. So we'd love to see examples and ideas of what you guys would love to see.
I think the whole licensing life cycle, it mirrors what you guys went through with Power BI. And so each time that you're doing this, you're making improvements, which is great. And you're learning more from the market and what people are asking for, kind of need to be more successful with it. So I really do appreciate the progress that's being made on the licensing side of things. I know that's not an easy thing to come up with from a plan that works for a vast majority of the world.
No one plan that works for everybody.
But we do appreciate all the efforts that are going into it.
Michelle, I'll turn my screen on for a minute. There's on one of the external docs pages that Shawn mentioned when it's talking about the meters. It's not an infographic, but we did try to just put a few visuals that show in month 1, in month 2, in month 3. These various different users show up, and how does that calculate out? We did the same thing for storage usage, and we did the same thing for the Power Platform request. So it's not drop dead simple infographic, but it is just trying to put a visual concept to say what's going on here. Then the overview has some of the similar themes from Shawn's presentation, like what are we trying to do here? Just link these things, move some connect some environments with billing policies and subscriptions and so forth. So it's not perfect, but it is we do want to just try to take from docs and bring it back from tons of deep words to some visuals.
That's good. At least if there's something that that's at least a starting point, because that gives me something to beautify with stickers and PowerPoint, so our clients can kind of get the gist. Cool. I'm excited.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people are excited for this. I'm also excited to see how many people are going to get addicted to Power Apps and Power Platform through this. Lower bar for entry.
This option definitely opens up those doors for organizations that want to try it out, right? They're not ready for the full-blown adoption yet, but they just want to test it out and see how the value they get out of it. So, thanks to the team for listening to all of the feedback that we've had and coming up with this consumption-based model, which makes it a lot more easier to make those decisions for organizations.